Today's date is July 5th, 2017. The location is Yankee Air Museum, Belleville, Michigan. The time is 3:00 p.m. and the person being interviewed is Georgia Mary Smith LABUNES. Georgia was born on February 10th, 1923. Georgia worked at the Ford B-24 bomber plant at Willow Run, Michigan during World War II. The interview is being conducted by Claire Kitchen-Daw, and this interview is being conducted on behalf of the Oral History Project at the Yankee Air Museum in Belleville, Michigan. Thank you for coming to the Yankee Air Museum today, Georgia, to share your World War II home front story with us. Your experiences of working at the historic Willow Run bomber plant are very important for our national records. Thank you for your service during the war.
You're welcome.
Please state your full name for the record.
Georgia Mary Smith LABUNES.
When and where were you born?
I was born in Bay Township, Charlevoix County, on Camp Daggett Road in Charlevoix County, Michigan.
And please share the names of your parents and siblings.
My father's name was Harrison Lobdell Smith, and my mother's name was Mame Stafford Smith. My brother was Charles Clifford Smith, and my sister's name was Carol May Smith Griganta.
And what is unusual about your brother's name, Charles Clifford?
He was named for our great-grandfather, who was a doctor in the Civil War. He went to Dartmouth College, graduated from Dartmouth College, was from New Hampshire originally, and he was in the war, in the Civil War, and he fought in the Battle of, he was in the Battle of Fredericksburg as a doctor. And after the battle, they had left him behind while they went on, and he took care of the wounded. And he took care of the wounded, and then when he went, as they say, when he left, the others had gone, so he went by himself. And it was it was raining a lot and muddy. It was when they went too, but it's my understanding they went from there to Gettysburg. It's my understanding that's where he went. But he was had a cold, got a cold from that, from being wet and muddy, and I don't know what he ate, or he was in enemy territory, so I don't know anything about that. But he applied after a while. It bothered him so much that he applied for discharge, but it took him quite a long time to be discharged. But he was eventually discharged from the Army.
And what did he do after the Civil War?
After the Civil War, he was a doctor, so he went back to his practice. And then he ran for something, I don't remember what, some office in government, I can't remember what it was, but he ran for office as a Democrat, which surprised me because I thought they were all Republicans.
Well, you should be proud of him.
He was a Democrat.
Yeah, you should be very proud of him.
That's what the records say.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Now, how did your parents meet? If you were born in Charlevoix County?
Yeah, I don't remember. I don't think they ever told us how they met. But he was in Petoskey at the time, and she was in Charlevoix, and it was quite common for them to go back and forth between the two towns. And there was a railroad that they could take the railroad. People rode the railroad a lot back then because that was their main way of traveling. So that's how they, yeah.
So it was a social networking of small towns like everyone else. Now, what interesting stories do you have of their wedding?
Well, they were married in 1918 on the 3rd of August, and 3 days later he left for France in the First World War. The First World War, and then so he went on to France. My mother went back to Charlevoix, and they had a wedding reception for her, but they didn't have any groom. So we have a picture of there with her in the white dress and everything, and all the relatives, but no husband.
And she continued to live with her parents until...
She visited out of the farm a lot, because they have a lot of pictures of her out there on the farm. But she continued to live with her father. Her father was a widower. Her mother died when she was 9, so her father was a widower, and she had a brother living there too, so she lived with them until my dad came home.
And did you hear any stories of him during World War I?
Well, I've heard a number of stories, and I have a lot of pictures of him in World War I. He worked in he was in the engineer corps, and he built a lot of roads. That seemed to be the main thing that he worked on while he was in the service.
I remember seeing a very large portrait of him in your house. A very, very striking portrait in his military uniform.
Yeah, my brother had that portrait painted for my mother. We always had a lot of pictures of him and around in that, and she had that painted. He had that painted for her.
Well, tell us about family life growing up in Charlevoix, Michigan.
Well, actually, we grew up on the farm, and it was a wonderful life for a child. For one thing, there was plenty of food during the Depression. We had lots of food, and we liked to work. I liked to work outside. My mother and grandmother did the work inside. And for a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, they got along so well. They each seemed to have what they did. They had specialties. That my grandmother was the meat cook, and my mother would bake bread and make the pastries, and my grandmother always made the donuts. And so they had what they did, and they got along really, really well. But it was a fun life, and we had my grandfather. When I was very small, my grandfather was gone a lot, because he was a game warden, so he was gone a lot. But then he finally retired, and then he was home all the time. So we all lived together. It was my grandparents' place. And when my father came home from service, he and my mother went to Detroit, and he was going to get a job down there. But my grandfather asked him if he would come home and run the farm and do it any way he wanted to and live there with them, because he was gone a lot, and his brothers were getting married and leaving, and he didn't want his wife to be by herself. And so he went home, and he always ran the farm, and she took care of the house just like it was theirs. So.
Now, you mentioned one other time that your grandfather had a Studebaker, and you used to enjoy going on picnics.
Yeah, he had a Studebaker that had little seats in the middle, so they would hold all of us, because as we got bigger, when we were small it was okay, but when we got bigger we were too big to fit in a car. So he bought the Studebaker that had seats in the middle. There's a funny story about that Studebaker, because when we were in high school, my dad would bring that and come over and pick us up for weekends, and I had a dog. The dog was mine. Its name was Mook, M-O-O-K, and Mook liked to ride over on Friday night to pick us up, because he missed us and missed us having us home, because he was my dog. So he would, on Fridays, he would go and sit by that car all day because he was afraid he'd miss his ride. Sundays, he didn't go back because my mother and grandmother usually rode back on Sunday, but Friday nights, he got to ride with us, and he would sit by that car all day, and they never knew how he figured out that it was Friday, but he seemed to know, and he just sat by the car all day so he didn't miss his ride.
Now, did you have other relatives in the Charlevoix area?
Yes, when we were in high school, we stayed at my aunt and uncle's place, my sister and myself. We stayed with them and went to high school with my father's brother and his wife, and so I went to high school with them, and then we came home weekends.
And you said you used to really enjoy picnics, and your mother and grandmother did a lot of canning of...
They did a lot of canning, and a lot of canning. I know for one thing, we picked blackberries over by Harbor Spring. They were on state property, and big, beautiful blackberries. And we would go over and spend a whole day over there picking blackberries, take a picnic lunch with us, and spend the whole day. And then they canned, I know one summer they canned 200 quarts of blackberries. And the neighbors did the same thing. The neighbors went over there. There were so many, they were all over the place, so you didn't have to worry about infringing on anybody's territory, because it belonged to the state and anybody could pick them.
So you had a wonderful life on the farm with picnics and lots of work and things to do.
Yeah, we had lots of work to do, but we had a lot of fun too. And we went on a lot of picnics, and we went swimming in Walloon Lake several times a day in the summertime. We would work in the morning in the fields or whatever we were doing, and then my dad would say, "You want to wash up before dinner, before lunch?" And he would take us down to the lake, and we'd take a quick swim, and then we'd come home, and same thing at night. He'd take us back to have another swim. So.
All right. So swimming. Did you also ice skate?
No, we didn't go. We didn't. We had a little pond on our own place that we could play on, and that was safe. But he didn't let us have ice skates because he was afraid of us going on Walloon Lake, which was spring fed, and you could drown easily there. So we never had ice skates. But we had lots of sleds and skis and things, and we had a lot of hills to go on. So I used to take my son to school, to the one-room schoolhouse that I went to for my first or the 8th grades. And I would walk, we lived kind of in a valley, and you would walk up a hill, and then I could give a run, and I would go halfway to school on my sled. And then we went up another hill, and in fact 2 more hills, little hills, small hills, and then we give a run, go all the rest of the way to school. So coming home wasn't quite as good.
Now tell us more about your grandfather being a game warden.
Yeah, my grandfather was a game warden. He was in the first bunch of game wardens that the state had. And game wardens were not too well liked back then because people were used to hunting and fishing whenever they pleased. And now all of a sudden they couldn't. They had to have a license, or they couldn't shoot things out or hunt or fish out of season or anything. And people didn't like that. But he was in the first group of and there was a funny story about Ernest Hemingway, who was a young man at the time. He was about 16, and he lived on Walloon Lake, but he lived farther down the lake from us and on the other side of the lake. But one time my uncle, who was also about 16, was in a boat down on the lake, and Ernest Hemingway and his sister came down. They had a launch, which is a big boat, and then they had a little canoe, a little small boat attached to it. So anyway, they were both out on the lake in the boat, and then a blue heron flew over, and Hemingway shot it. And my uncle hollered to him and said, "Hey, that's against the law, and my father's a game warden." And Ernest Hemingway, "Yeah, I bet your father's a game warden." So anyway, he and his sister put the bird in the boat, and they got in the little boat, and they went ashore and took a picnic lunch and went off to have their picnic lunch. So while they were doing that, my uncle went to the boat and took the bird home and told his father, who happened to be home at the time. He usually wasn't home, but he just happened to be home. So when Ernest Hemingway came back to his boat and saw that the bird was gone, then he started worrying about it a little bit. And right on the back of his boat was the name of their cottage, so they knew who it was. Otherwise, they wouldn't have known who he was. And so he hurried home, and anyway, and then my grandfather went over to their house to confront him, and his mother came out, and they wrote about it in all their books, so apparently it bothered them a lot. And his sister wrote about it in her book, and his brother wrote about it in a book. And they also said that Ernest Hemingway wrote about it, and every year he embellished it a little bit until he had the game warden chasing him all over the state of Michigan. But so anyway, what happened was my grandfather did go there, and she claimed that she took a gun out and chased him off the property. But in the first place, that would have been against the law, and my grandfather wouldn't have stood for that. So if I see a picture of him, you'd understand that didn't happen. But he never talked about it to us about anything happening. But we were told that he went across the lake and went to Horton Bay, which if he got across the lake, it was a very short distance to Horton Bay, and somebody over there had him get somebody, probably the sheriff, to come in and confess to what he had done and pay a small fine, and that took care of it. So,
tell us about your schooling.
Well, first I went to the local school, which was a one-room schoolhouse. Went there for 8 years, and then from there we went to Charlevoix and went to high school in Charlevoix. And I graduated from high school in Charlevoix in 1941, the spring of 1941. And that fall, I started Central Michigan College. While I was in college in the November, I think it was, they called me and told me that my father was in the hospital very ill, and my aunt and uncle were coming to get me to bring me home. So my father had diabetes, so I knew he was not in good health. But so they came down, got me, and took me up to Petoskey, and he was there for a few days, and I thought he was better. In fact, I decided that I would go back to school because I didn't want to get too far behind. It was almost the end of the semester, and I didn't want to get too far behind. So anyway, so I started back to college, and I got as far as Clare, and a neighbor came and got me and brought me back. They called me and told me to get the next bus back, but there wasn't any bus that day. So he came down and picked me up and took me home, took me back to Petoskey. And my father died on the 13th of December, but Pearl Harbor was on December 7th. So we were at war, and my father was never told that we were at war because he was worried about it, because he had been in war and he knew what wars were all about, so he was concerned about it. And but then, I can't remember what it.
The war in Europe started in 1939. How did your family find out about it, or how did it affect your family life?
Well, I think my father was very concerned about it, that there was a war, and he was afraid. In fact, we had some neighbor kids over one time, and we were out at the dining room table playing and laughing and everything, and my father was, I guess he was listening to somebody on the radio, and he let into us. He said, "You two silly little boys, there's going to be a war, and you're probably going to go to it. And you two silly little girls, you're going to know what war is all about too." And so he was very concerned about the war. And
you heard most of it through what? Radio, newspapers?
Radio and paper, okay. But a lot from radio, because we always listened to all the newscasts. If there were newscasts back then, we listened to them. I don't remember if they had them or not, but I imagine they did.
What were the political leanings of your family? Were they Republicans or Democrats?
They were Republican until Hoover came in, and what turned my father was when the soldiers went to Washington to ask for they were promised a bonus, and he went to get this bonus, and some soldiers went to ask them for a bonus. They hurried up and they wanted their bonus because it was Depression times and they needed money, and the President Hoover, he sent the police down, or the soldiers down. He sent somebody to chase them out of town, and that instead of going down and explaining to them that they would get it, or being nice about it, he just chased. And here they were soldiers who had fought for the country and everything, and so that turned my father off on him. So they all changed to be Democrats.
What do you remember about hearing of the attack on Pearl Harbor?
I heard it on television when President Roosevelt said that talked about that it was a day of infamy. We heard the speech, and we were very concerned because my father was so ill and everything, and we knew how worried he was about the war, so we were very concerned about it.
Did your brother get enlisted? Was your brother drafted, or did he join the service?
And no, he was. I don't know if he joined or not, or tried to join, but they never took him because when he was a child, he had a ruptured appendix, and it's a wonder that he even lived. But he had scar tissue, and they wouldn't take him in service, so he never did go.
How do you think your life changed after the United States entered the war? Did you see any change with your lifestyle?
Well, of course there were changes because so many things were rationed. The gas was rationed, and sugar was rationed, and there was a lot, and so many men were gone. So many of our relatives had gone into service. So it was very different. Yeah, and you heard all the news every day about all these things happening, and so.
Now, it was during that time you moved to Birmingham, Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And what was going on there? Why were you there?
Well, I went to Birmingham, Michigan because the summer before I had spent the summer working at a cottage on Walloon Lake, taking care of children, and they wanted someone who could swim and take the children so their parents could enjoy themselves at the lake and not have to be worrying about the children. So I can't remember what I was going to talk about.
Why you were in Birmingham? You were there taking care of kids. Then
I was there taking care of kids. Yeah, they wanted somebody who could swim, so I could go out with on a boat, and so the kids would have a good time too. So.
All right, now we're getting to the part where you have to tell us about Irma, your friend Irma, who is the beginning of your connection to Willow Run.
Right. Yeah. Well, my girlfriend Irma was working as she was a very good friend. We've been friends since we were 5 years old and first met in school. Our parents were opposite in politics, and we're not especially good friends, but we were good friends. And she was a really good friend all my life. But she asked me. She said, "I want to go to Willow Run, to Ann Arbor and work at Willow Run." She said, "Would you like to do that? Go with me?" She said, "We could both work there together, and we could be roommates and everything." Well, that sounded good to me, so I went down to Ann Arbor. And at first I had to wait a little while before I went there in the spring, but I had to wait a little while because they said I needed glasses. I had a physical, and they said I needed glasses. So I had to get glasses before I went. So then I went out to Willow Run in so in the early summer or late spring of 1943.
Now, how do you think Irma heard about the bomber plant?
Well, I think I don't know how she heard about it, but I think, I never asked her how she heard, but I think it was well known because they were out recruiting people to come there to work. Because we had people who came from Canada to work, and people from the Upper Peninsula came there to work. So I think she probably had heard about it.
So tell us about living in Ann Arbor.
Well, Irma and I had an apartment together, and let's see,
Do you remember the address?
it was on Ann Street. I think it's 5 something. I can't remember. 500, something like that.
520.
520 East Ann Street. Right.
And was it just the whole house for you, or?
No, Irma's aunt and uncle were there. They were also working at Willow Run, and they and their 2 daughters, and they had a big apartment downstairs. But we had a smaller apartment upstairs. We had a combination living room, bedroom, and a kitchen. So we had a fair-sized apartment, and then the bathroom was down the hall. So we had to go to if we wanted to go to the bathroom, we had to go walk down the hall to get to it. And then my sister was already in Ann Arbor, and she and her girlfriend were still in the same. They came in the same house, and then Irma's sister came there to work at Willow Run, and she stayed up there. So we had the whole upstairs of that house, and we had a good time. We used to get together every Sunday and have Sunday dinner together, and at different apartments. And we would put a sheet on the floor for our tablecloth and sit on the floor to eat because we didn't have enough chairs. And I think they had to bring their own silverware and stuff with them. And I know this one, Irma's cousin, baked a chicken one time, which we thought was really something. She went overboard baking this chicken. And my sister said to her, "This gizzard is so good. What did you stuff it with?" And she had this blank look on her face, and finally she'd never cleaned it. So my sister was eating on this. So that we had fun over that. So it was fun. We had good times. We didn't have a whole lot of time because, especially Irma and myself, because we worked all 6 days a week, and we only had Sunday off.
Did you work the same shifts?
I worked on the afternoon shifts because it was cooler. I liked it. I started on the afternoon shift, and I liked it. It was cooler, and it was less hectic. The daytime was more going on. It was noisier and things. So
Did Irma work on that same shift?
No, Irma worked days, and she always worked in the office. Oh. From the time she went there, they found out that she was a good secretary, so they put her in the main office. So she worked in the main office all the time we were there.
Now, how did you get from Ann Arbor to Willow Run?
Well, at first I had to take the bus, and sometimes the bus was too full, and so they had a trailer that they hauled behind the bus. And it was a covered trailer. There was a cover on it, but you had to stand up, and you had to hang on to a strap in the middle. So all of us, the straps were only in the middle, so we were all around the circle hanging onto the straps to get. Well, that wasn't too pleasant. And right away I found a ride with somebody, and he would pick us up. He got extra gas he could get extra gas for driving, and also we paid him, so it was a good deal. So the rest of the time I always rode with him. He came right to the door and got us and got me. So.
And did that person also work at Willow Run?
Yes, he did. Mm-hmm.
You had other people in the car. It was just.
Yes, there were. We had. There was a man with a Greek accent and one with a German accent. The one with the German accent, his name was Engelbert Zwick, and he worked in the same department that I did. I could see him working there, but not close to me.
So tell us about your boss at Willow Run.
Well, my boss's name was Stanley Skinner, and he was a really nice boss. My job there, the first job that I had, was hanging small parts of the plane on a rack, and we had to hang them in such a way that there wouldn't be air pockets, because a crane would pick them up and dip them into vats of cleaning fluid, and so you couldn't if you didn't get the well cleaned or everything, they wouldn't plate well. So that's where I did, and I was there for quite a long time when they informed me that I had to leave because there was But there was another lady who had been bumped off her job, and so because of the union, she could go and take somebody else's job. So she took my job. So I had the place that I was sent was a place called the dope room, and the dope room was that when we first got there, they sent me to a fire drill, and I went to this fire drill, and the man said he was telling us what to do in case of a fire drill, and he said the place I was going to was called the dope room, and so he said, if you're working in the dope room, and there's a fire, you run like hell. And I was told that the roof of it was just laid on because in case of an explosion, it would lift off. So, and they used metal. They didn't use metal tools in there at all because they didn't want to cause sparks.
So your first boss was, or your boss was Stanley Skinner, and that was in what department?
That was in the plating department.
Plating department, okay. And you were unionized?
Oh yes, everybody was unionized there, right.
What did you wear in the plating department?
We just wore slacks, yeah. It seemed to me that I remembered going and getting coveralls, but I don't remember too much about it. I just remember getting them, but I didn't do it every day, so whether I wasn't wearing something proper at the time or what, but a lot of them wore coveralls, but I always wore just slacks.
Okay. And how did you like working at Willow Run?
I always enjoyed it there, except the dope room. I was in the dope room for a while. I don't think I was, well, when I first went there, they gave us buckets of glue and a paintbrush, and we had to paint on a part of the tail of the plane. And they had this part up on it was a good sized piece of the tail, and we had to. It would be one lady on one side and myself on the other, painting this stuff on there. And I finished my side, and I was waiting for her to finish hers. And the boss there, I don't remember his name, but he came up to me and he said, "Hey, you, what are you doing just standing there?" And I didn't like his tone of voice, and so I said to him, "I'm done with my side. What do you want me to do? Jump over the plane and do her side too?" And he didn't say anything more, but I heard afterward that he had been informed that they were or thought that they were having a slowdown because he thought that they were working him too hard. So but anyway, he never said anything more about it. But I hadn't been there. I don't remember working there too long, and it was not a good job because the glue, when you would get on your hands, and then your knuckles would crack. It would harden, and your knuckles would crack, and so it was not a good. It was not a nice place to work, and I wasn't too crazy about it. But I hadn't been there too long, and my boss from the other department came down. Stanley Skinner came down and said, "There's an office. There's an opening in the little office in our department, and the lady who's worked there has quit or transferred. She's no longer there, and I was wondering if you'd like to come back and work there." And I said I would like it very much. So he said, "Well, I have to get permission from the boss here." I guess he knew him by name. He said I'll have to get permission from him. So he went over and talked to him, and he gave him permission. I told everybody I thought he was glad to get rid of me.
Now, did you ever have any medical complications or problems from all the glue you put on from the doping room?
No, I never did.
Never did. Did you ever have any kind of precautions when you were in the plating department or in the doping room in terms of gloves?
I never did. I think then when you're young, when you're like your knuckles would crack and you put stuff on them, you don't. That's just life, you don't do it. You don't. So.
Do you feel that you were fairly compensated? Were you paid well for your job?
Well, I think at that time it was fine, but now I don't think it was that much. But then they didn't pay as much as they do now. But living expenses were much cheaper then too. So, yeah, I was fine with it.
Were you able to were you paid just enough to survive, or were you able to save any money?
No, I was paid well enough because I sent some money home to my mother and to help her out a little bit, and so I bought bonds. They were great for selling bonds. And I bought some bonds, and then one day I thought I should start saving some money, so I started saving. I don't know how long it took me to decide on that, but anyway, I started saving money. And there wasn't a lot of time to spend money anyway, except for your apartment you paid and your food, and the clothes that you needed and so forth. But And there was a funny thing happened while I was working at the in the department, the plating department, when I was first working there. We had a room that we went to where we had lockers, which we furnished our own padlock for the locker, and you could put your coat in there and your whatever you wanted to put in there. Well, I don't remember that I put my lunch in there, but I don't think I ever put my purse in there. I think we took our purse down where we were, because I didn't think that was in the locker. But one night when I went to go home, my coat was gone out of my locker, but the lock was locked. You know, they didn't have the key to the lock. You know, I didn't know what happened to it, and it was cool. So one of the men loaned a sweater to me to get home, to get home with, and so I had, and it was the type of coat that was quite popular in those days. It was, it had one side was a coat and the other side was a raincoat, so you could turn it inside out, and it was quite a popular coat at the time. And but anyway, it disappeared, so I had to buy a new coat. But the following spring, I got a notice from one of the cleaners that I had left something there, and if I wanted it, I should come and get it, otherwise they were going to dispose of it. So I didn't know what it was, so I went down to find out, and it was a coat just like mine, except that it was a man's coat, and it was way too big for me, but my scarf and my handkerchief, and a handkerchief of mine, were laundered and were attached to it. So what happened to it? Somebody had to get a hold of my name and address, so who it was, I don't know.
What did they do with all that liquid that they had in the plating department?
They had to, yeah, that liquid had to be emptied. In fact, I met my husband while I was working there, and his job was to go around with test tubes and get little samples of the plating of the fluid, and they would check them to make sure they were clean enough. And when I worked in the office, that was one of my jobs, was to call in and tell them that they wanted to empty these tanks, and could they get permission to empty so many gallons of this. I guess they went into the river there, so they would have to get permission, because there were other people dumping stuff in it too, so other departments dumping stuff in there, so they had to do that. So
just a wild dump at that particular point. How long did you work at Willow Run?
Well, I worked almost 2 years. I went from the early summer of 1943, and I worked there until spring of 1945, when the war in Europe ended and I was laid off.
How did they break the news to you that you were just terminated after the war ended?
I don't recall. I just don't recall what happened. I think I had been up north, and I came back from up north, and I wasn't back, but I would have stayed longer if I'd known they were going to get rid of me. But I don't remember what they told me. But I didn't have any trouble getting a job. By then I was engaged to my husband, so I was going to be leaving anyway. So I went to Argus Camera and got a job at Argus for the few months that I worked. And they were glad any time. The first time when I had to get new glasses, I went up to the hospital and got a job up there, telling them that I was going to be leaving there and going to Willow Run. They didn't care. They kept me for as long as they needed to. So.
Now, did you ever do any volunteering during those war years at the Red Cross or the UFSO or church functions?
I never did at that time, because that was we were so busy. You know, we worked till 11 o'clock at night. So I believe we started at 3 in the afternoon, but I wouldn't swear to that. But I think it was 11 hours. We worked at least 9 hours.
Well, now tell us about your husband and how the two of you met.
Well, I met him. He usually worked days, and he had transferred there from the Flat Rock plant, and so he was working there, and I didn't know him. I'd never seen him before, you know, and everything, and he came over to get acquainted with me, and then he started asking me when was I going to go out with him, and I thought he was a tease, and he was a tease, but I didn't like him. I thought he was too loud, and I just didn't care for him. So anyway, he would ask me when I was going to go out with him, and I would say, that'll be the day. And so anyway, finally, and it was this went on for quite a long time, and one of the older men who worked there told me, he said, you know, Sam's a really nice guy, you ought to give him a chance. So then I started going out with him, and so we got married that summer of 45, and we were married over 50 years.
And his full name was?
Samuel LABUNES.
And what about your honeymoon?
Well, we went to Charlevoix on our honeymoon, and my aunt and uncle were still living up there, so we went to see them. And while we were there, they had the news on, and they told about the war ending, you know, and that Yeah, in Japan. No, they told about the bomb dropped on Japan. And when they did, my uncle said that's the end of the war. As soon as he heard that, that's the end of the war. So.
Now, did Sam continue to work at Willow Run?
No, he could go back to Flat Rock, but he was laid off a lot. You know, they had to reconvert from what they were making, and so he was laid off a lot. We lived with for the first year we were married, we lived with my mother-in-law. She told all of us as we got married in that family, stay with us for a year, and that'll give you a chance to save a little money toward a house, and everything. So we did that, and so anyway, we lived there for a year. Then we bought a house.
Do you remember writing letters to people in the service during this time?
I did write to somebody, and his name was Bill Hill, and he wrote a letter, and they were kept to Mary Smith, and it kept coming to our house. And it was Route 1 Petoskey, which was our number, and the mailman they'd put it back in the mail, and pretty soon it would come back there. And my grandmother said, "Oh, he's just a soldier. Or he's not just a soldier, he's a soldier. Why don't you write to him? He probably doesn't know her that well." And so anyway, so I started writing to him, and then he had some of his friends writing to my girlfriends, and and he talked about coming to see me after the war and everything. But by then I was engaged to somebody else, so I never did meet him. But we wrote off and on most of the time during the war. Yeah.
Looking back, what would you say these World War II years did for your life? How did it affect your journey, your personal journey?
Well, it affected everything, because I wouldn't have come down to this end of the state. I probably would have stayed up north, and I probably would have married somebody up there. So I met my husband. Irma met my husband. We introduced my husband. Well, the first date that I went with my husband, he took me to meet his friend Mike, and he's a redheaded friend. And then he said, and Mike said, "Well, do you know anybody? Do you have anybody that I could go out with?" And so I said, "Well, yeah, my girlfriend." And so anyway, we got them together. I don't think he asked then. I think he asked afterwards. I think he asked Sam afterwards. I don't think he asked me that while we were there. But so we introduced them, and they started. We double dated with them. She went out on a blind date, and she ended up marrying him. So my best friend married his best friend, so we were friends all our lives.
What would you say to any young people today about living through a war period? Would you give them any pieces of advice or words of encouragement, or what would you say?
Yeah, well, wars are all different. They're all different. They have more worse weapons all the time, and so I don't know. It's just I guess everybody has to kind of figure it out for themselves, because it's changed so much since we went.
Do you find that you've talked to many people about your time at Willow Run? Is that a part that your friends all know you worked there? And
no, I didn't. Well, for a long time, the people. The first 10 years we lived in the same house, and the people around there knew it, and everything. And then after a while, you don't even think to tell them, So I didn't tell anybody about it. So I'd kind of forgotten all about it. And then when they were talking about Rosie the Riveter and Rosies and everything, my niece kept telling me, "Oh, why don't you sign up to be a Rosie?" And I said, "No, So, but anyway, she finally talked me into it.
So you're going to be a Rosie the Riveter, even though you didn't rivet, but you are a proud woman who worked in the defense industries.
Right.
Now, did you bring any pictures to share with the museum? Would you tell us what they are?
I have a picture of. I have one picture of myself and Irma and her cousin and my sister's friend, and it was kind of funny because when we came to Ann Arbor, most of us had been living home all the time, and so we were eating desserts and living it up. And it showed in that picture we're all pretty portly, and then we decided, we better start going on a diet. So we went on a diet, and I don't remember what we ate for dinner, and I don't even remember when I worked nights what I did for dinner. I just don't remember, but because of that, we ate too much. I know for lunch we had a peanut butter sandwich and an orange, and we lost weight on it. So we got all the weight off. We did lose the weight. So, but it's kind of funny because the picture shows. I think we thought we lost. I know one time we thought we had lost so much weight because we felt we felt that we had lost enough weight and everything, and we took pictures and we had not lost that much weight. So
Did you have other pictures too, or just that one?
I have a couple pictures of myself with my husband, and let's see, what's the other picture? I have them right here. Yeah. I think that's, yeah, and one picture of me by myself. Yeah.
Did you keep anything from your years at Willow
I don't.
Run?
I've given things away over the years, so I don't have anything really that I saved from there. I used to have. They used to make things out of plexiglass or something there, and they had little bomber planes that they would put into these and things. And I had those, but over the years I've given those away, or I don't have them anymore. So.
Well, Georgia, this was a very wonderful interview, and we thank you for sharing your story. We thank you for your service to this country during the home front years, World War II. You should be incredibly proud of what you did. Working at Willow Run, coming down with your friend Irma, going and working in the plating department and in the doping room, and you should be very proud of what you did for this country and for the legacy of World War II. We're honored to have you here.
Thank you. I didn't think about it that way, but maybe. But I was glad to do it. And I did enjoy my time there. I did not enjoy the dope room, but otherwise I enjoyed my time there.
Thank you for coming in today.
You're welcome.